Well, hello class. Welcome to another amazing video here for WHAP. This is topic 6 of unit 6, and it is the next to last topic before we are done with all our content. So we're picking back up where we left off last week, and today we're going to look at causes of migration. So let's get to it. Here's the context, and it's stuff you all already know. Imperialism leads to a global economy that will encourage migration in search of opportunity. The whole land of immigrants thing kind of comes to mind here. And you also already know that industrialization is going to push people out of the farms and into cities or urban centers. And that's, of course, going to create opportunity for some and problems for others. The demand for new forms of labor, especially after slavery is abolished, we'll get into all that. Slavery is going to leave a huge void in the labor force, and they're going to wonder, how are we going to make up for that? So there's going to be new coerced forms of labor, semi-coerced migration. We'll get into all that in this video. But here's our essential question moving forward. What environmental, this is important, environmental and economic factors contributed to patterns of migration between the period that we're on, 1750 to 1900? This is important to separate economic from environment, because you may be asked in a DBQ to write about this very topic, and it's important that you know the difference. So, well, let's get to it then, and let's discuss topic 6 of unit 6. So slavery is ending around the world, and as we mentioned in the first slide, resources, there's a need for resources, the main resource being human resource. Okay, slavery, as I said, is going to leave that vacuum open. So human resources is the main thing. So that results in European states looking for new types of laborers to work on plantations. Here are some examples. Indian laborers go to work in British colonies. Chinese laborers go to work out in California and the western part of the United States and to British Malaya. And they are going to be used to work on railroads. Most of the railroads out in the west United States were built by Chinese laborers. Japanese laborers went to Hawaii to work on the sugar plantations. They also went to places like Peru in South America and in Cuba, which is the island right off the coast of Florida. So let's take a look at some of the coerced labor systems. Slavery is on the way out, on paper. Please understand that. It was being abolished in most places, but the practice continues for so many years. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. That wasn't enough to free slavery, it just meant this is what I declare is going to happen. 2 years later, in fact, just before the assassination of Lincoln, the 13th Amendment passed, which effectively outlawed slavery on paper. Brazil and Cuba, they would end slavery a little bit later, but Africans will continue to enslave one another well into the 1900s. Okay? Indentured servitude is another opportunity. It's a way for the very poor to get more opportunities. They work for a certain number of years based on a contract in exchange for opportunity, and then they get freedom. Some will stay temporarily, some will stay permanently, but either way, it isn't much different than slavery. You're basically working off a debt, the debt that you incurred just from traveling to that place and the privilege to live there and to work there. Asian contract laborers, very similar. They're forced or in some cases tricked into work to replace slaves. The media will hail this practice as a new form of slavery, and they may actually be onto something here with this. By the 1870s, we're going to see that practice mostly banned. So, as I always do, I'm going to stand out of the way here just in case you want to take some notes on your Unit 6 packet. Well, let's continue on with this. Let's look at French penal colonies. Prisoners sent to penal colonies in Africa, New Caledonia, and French Guiana. French Guiana is located there in South America. These colonies were designed only to house convicts and political prisoners, much like Australia does for the British. And then we'll also get into Georgia in just a second. Devil's Island is a French penal colony in Guyana, which is located in Africa. Notorious for the terrible treatment of convicts. The people there are underfed, it's very hard labor, and that practice is going to continue till not even 100 years ago. 1938 is when that is going to actually end. You can see in places like that today, they still have graves from a lot of the prisoners that died there. The British penal colonies, first to Georgia, and then, like I said, they went to Australia. They were sent to Australia. Convicts are coming from all parts of the British Empire, and remember that can be anywhere, practically anywhere in the world at that time. Again, hard labor, that should say harsh punishments, not hash punishments. They were not actually imprisoned, but they were working for free settlers, right? They were basically enslaved. They worked on government projects, government posts. Some were never ever allowed to return home. Some chose not to because travel was expensive, and the debts they incurred getting there in the first place, wouldn't have been worth it to go on back home. In 1850, the practice is ended because it wasn't seen as much punishment, and the free settlers started coming to Australia in a gold rush in 1851. The gold rush in 1850 in the western part of the U.S. and in 1851 in Australia is actually going to change a lot of this, and it's going to change it pretty much on a dime, as you can imagine. So this is just a quick overview of penal colonies that was used in the age of imperialism. Now we get to this. This is a concept known as the diaspora. The diaspora, and you can see it on this map, it looks a lot like the Atlantic slave trade, and guess what? It's exactly the same place it was. A diaspora, it comes from the word dispersion, a mass immigration from one place over time. The African slave trade, we've talked about this in previous units, is the biggest diaspora that ever existed, also known as the Middle Passage. Most diasporas are the result of poverty, political conditions, and famine, and the need for coerced labor. So let's not forget that. India, most people left India because it was such a poor country, and only in recent years has it really begun to start coming back to life, so to speak. Many would leave as indentured servants to work on plantations for those 5-year contracts we talked about. About 1.5 million Indians, not Native Americans now, from India, went to the colonies before 1916 when indentured servitude was ended. And that was also in the midst of a world war, World War I. China, as you can see there on the right side of your screen, this took place in the middle of the 19th century. People left to escape poverty and famine. The unrest in China from the Taiping Rebellion and the Opium Wars, which we covered, is one reason to leave. That is called a push factor. Pull factor is something that brings you into a place. Pull factor is something that pushes you out of a place. In this case, these are push factors. Illiterate, landless peasants were looking for an opportunity. Most were male that planned to return home, but they left as indentured servants to work on the railroads, particularly in the United States, of course, Canada and South Australia as well. But they were predominantly busy here in the United States. And we'll look in the next unit of what the effect of that was, and it's not pretty, let me tell you. Okay, so again, I'll step over here to pause. Let's jump over to Europe now. Let's look at Ireland. Great Britain and Ireland. Boy, this is a factor right here that I wish we could spend more time on. But for political reasons, Great Britain absorbs Ireland into the Greater United Kingdom, and in 1801 they abolished the Irish Parliament altogether. And it's a matter of discrimination between Roman Catholics and Protestants. Okay, tenant farmers are being evicted from their land, and in Ireland they had what was called the Great Famine, and in your textbooks you may see it as the potato famine, because potato was a big staple crop. Remember, it's not indigenous to Ireland, but once they got it, it became a staple part of their diet. Well, for 4 years they're going to undergo a terrible time in the Great Famine. So Irish workers would then also immigrate to the U.S. and to Great Britain, but mostly to the U.S. to again build railroads and canals. Again, I would say most of our railroads in this country were built by either Chinese or by Irish workers, and that's only for the railroads that were built between 1750 and 1900, and maybe a little bit some after that as well. Okay. Moving over to the boot, Italy. Italy unifies in the middle part of the 19th century. And over the course of 4 decades, about 7 million Italians leave. Most of them go to other parts of Europe, with the other half coming here to the U.S. or the Americas and to New Zealand. Now, it's mostly men with skills and farmers that are trying to escape hard conditions there in Italy. Some left for political reasons, others left for economic reasons like escaping organized crime, which Italy, as you know, is pretty notorious for. So we've got the Chinese and the Irish and some Italians all immigrating to the United States. And it's during those years, especially from about the 1880s until the 1920s, about 1925, where you see the immigration rate in this country double, triple, and quadruple in some cases. It grows exponentially during that time. So whenever you hear, oh, we're a nation of immigrants, they're probably talking about 1880s to the 1920s. That's just saying. But this is how it started. Most importantly, this is why it started. Okay. So I'll stand over here and let you continue on. Now, most who moved permanently around the British Empire went to settler colonies like Canada, South Africa, Australia, or New Zealand. And those who went to other colonies didn't usually plan to live there permanently. And here's some more specific examples here. We know that some technical experts like engineers and geologists migrated to South Asia and Africa. Andrew Geddes Bain, here's one of the names, who went to Cape Town, South Africa, and in doing so created the first geological map of Africa, something they didn't have before. British engineers were so numerous that they spread Western science and technology around the world. And what it's going to do is going to blend their knowledge with engineers from colonial lands. Okay, so all of that is one of those side effects of this immigration model that we're looking at. In Argentina, now in South America, it's called Britain's informal empire, where businessmen, traders, bankers moved to found, they established banks and they developed trade in the area. So Argentina does have a place in this story as well, as does Japan. The Colonization Society is formed to help Japan imperialize, because Japan's power is definitely starting to grow, and all that's going to come to a head in 1902 when they fight Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, and they win. So good for them. So the Japanese wanted places to send surplus people and goods. They tried out a settler colony in Mexico. That didn't work out. Japanese men are leaving Japan to go to the United States to study. And in 1907, and this is one of those U.S. history things, you'll see this in your U.S. history class because it's probably on their state test, an agreement known as the Gentleman's Agreement was where the United States said that they would not pass laws against immigration as long as Japan stopped sending immigrants. Now, this is an agreement. This is not a treaty. This is not a pact. This is not even on paper. This is a gentleman's agreement. Because here's the bottom line. Whether it's Chinese, Irish, or Japanese, or even Italian, nativism, which is a big problem in the United States at that time, people are fearing that immigrants are taking their jobs, taking their opportunities. You see a lot of xenophobia occurring at that time, and it just becomes a mess. They're very, very racist against other peoples. They were especially hard on the Chinese and the Irish. So this is just one thing that says, look, we won't stop Japanese immigration, just don't send anymore. So in a way, we're in a big way, we're very, very racist against the Japanese at that time. As you can see, this is barely a century ago as well. So here's another chart, and I'm going to try to show this to you up close, but improvements in transportation allowed some people to migrate permanently and others to come home eventually. In 1885, Japan and Hawaii made an agreement. And here was their agreement. It was a labor agreement. They can freely come to work on plantations under 3-year contracts and then go home. Okay? Just like that. You have a contract, pay off your debt, you go home. 29,000 Japanese will go to Hawaii over the next 9 years, starting in 1885, and then they're released to that contract after they've done their time. Same thing, Italy with Argentina had something similar. What you're going to see is most immigrants are going to settle in cities and they're not going to go home. And that's going to create the melting pot that we like to call it. And folks, that word melting pot, it's a misnomer. I don't care what grade you learned it in. We are not a melting pot as much as we are more of a tossed salad. I like the tossed salad example a lot better than the melting pot example. But this chart right here, let me pick y'all up and move you close. Let's take a look here. May want to pause it right here while I'm holding it. Here is a chart showing voluntary migration patterns in the 19th century. This would be a good place to pause it because my arms are getting tired. And then down here you have coerced. Ooh, let me turn that the other way. There we go. You have coerced. There's a good place. Coerced or semi-coerced migration patterns in the 19th century. Okay, so that is a good chart for you to use when looking at that. So anyway, just thought I would kind of show that to you. But feel free to stop, and I may send this out if definitely you need it. Well, folks, this has been the causes of the migrations. In our next video, we'll be looking at the effects of imperialism, and next video is going to be our last one of this entire unit. So, thanks for watching. Do your homework, stay safe, practice social distancing, and I'll see you in the next video.